So, as everyone is aware of, the 2023 Philadelphia Eagles had a humongous collapse. I know I said it wasn't the worst collapse in 2023's NFL season, and a big reason why I said that was mainly on the lines of the Philadelphia Eagles in the end did get a playoff spot, whereas the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had a nearly identical collapse to the Philadelphia Eagles, did not get a postseason spot. But in this video, I want to talk about why I think this was a historic collapse, one that will probably never happen again. And I also want to talk about why I think that the 10-1 being misleading isn't totally accurate and fair, as well as talk about the fact as to, what I think, needs to be done. And we'll also make a few references to the Jaguars. But here's the thing. Being 8-3 and not making the playoffs, that's not new. Being 8-3 and not making the playoffs is not new. First of all, you could have a very competitive schedule. There have been times where 11-5 is not good enough to make the playoffs. I get that that's rare, but even when the postseason bracket expanded to 7 seeds, 10-6 was not always good enough to get your team into the postseason. So being 8-3 and not making the playoffs is absolutely nothing new. And being 8-3 doesn't even guarantee that you're going to have that good of a record. Like the Jaguars, they were 9-8, and the Miami Dolphins last year also started off 8-3 and finished 9-8, causing them to completely lose control of the AFC East. And they were lucky to even got into the wild card round because they needed the Buffalo Bills to defeat the New England Patriots for them to have gotten in, which happened. And of course, they had to beat the slipping, sliding Jets. But being 9-8 definitely does not guarantee you a postseason spot. And we saw the 8-3 Ravens in 2021 go 8-9, completely failing into the playoffs and going from the 1 seed down to the 12 seed. Effectively, they were the 12th worst team. The 5th worst team in the AFC. They were last place in that AFC North. It was just a brutal, brutal season for Baltimore in 2021. So, while Jaguars definitely had the worst collapse of the season, having 2 games control of the AFC South and having secured tiebreakers with both the Jaguars and Texans and still missing out on an AFC South title. I think that's the playoffs. I think that's the worst collapse of the season. Those are my thoughts on it. With that being said, however, the Eagles' collapse is historical. Before the Eagles, only one 10-1 team has ever failed to amass 12 wins, the 1986 Jets. However, the 1986 Jets, they might have had as bad of an end of a season as the Eagles did. But they were still able to squeak out a postseason win against the Chiefs, 35-15. And they even almost made it to the AFC Championship game. However, a controversial penalty in a game against the Cleveland Browns, after they were leading 20-10, tied up the game at 20 points, and the Browns won 23-20 in double overtime. Double overtime is very rare. We last saw that with the Mile High Miracle, with the Baltimore Ravens defeating the Denver Broncos in double overtime. However, double overtime is still a very rare thing, so that meant that the Jets put up a really good fight, and they almost made it to the AFC Championship game in 1986. This year's Eagles, their collapse continued into the postseason, where at first, in the first half, it sounds that they might have had some signs of competitiveness against the Buccaneers. They were only down 16-9, and they had the ball until the second half. But once they got that safety, it was all over for Philadelphia. And you just have to wonder, what was their game plan? And were their coordinators even sober? And that was a very, very disappointing end to the season. A season that pretty much proved that the entire NFC East were frauds. Giants last year, 9-7-1, and everyone thought they'd do better. But if you looked at how the Giants had the easy schedule last year and how they had a negative point differential, you would as well as the fact they started off 7-2 and finished off 9-7-1, you would understand that there was no chance that the Giants could replicate their success heading into the 2023 season. Look at the Washington Commanders. They were 8-1. But of course, that was too good to be true. The NFC East had one of the easiest schedules for the 2022 season. 2023 was a lot harder on them. You look at the Cowboys. They managed to win a postseason game last year, but they have not won a postseason game since 2018 against a team that actually, has a winning record. And this is, another thing I wanted to stress. The 2021 Bucs were a lot better than the 2023 Bucs, and they had Tom Brady, and they had a 13-4 record in the second seed in the NFC. The Eagles were only the 7th seed in the NFC. They were 9-8, and it was a rebuilding year where they hadn't beaten a single good team, and they had one of the easy schedules. Again, 2021 Eagles, you could call them frauds, but ultimately it's just impressive how they made the playoffs in a rebuilding year after their disastrous 2020 season. And they only lost 31-15 against the Buccaneers. This was a worse loss when the Eagles were better than they were in 2021, or so it seemed. When the Buccaneers were worse than they were in 2021 because they had Baker Mayfield and they could only finish 9-8. And I mean, it's just like the Bucs are a team the Eagles beat 25-11 in the regular season. But of course, the Philadelphia Eagles completely imploded in the postseason and they lost 32-9. So, first of all, that is a historic collapse. Starting off 10-1, then collapsing to finish under 12 wins, and then not being able to win a postseason game. Are there teams who start off 10-1 and who fail to win a postseason game? I mean, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. You can absolutely see how this happened. The 2020 Pittsburgh Steelers started off 11-0, finished off 12-4. They won the AFC North, but they then failed to win a postseason game against the Cleveland Browns. They lost 48-37 after falling down 28-0 in the first quarter. A valiant comeback effort by the Steelers, but it came up 11 points short. And and I mean, that is just a historic collapse. And if you're wondering why I'm not screencastifying this, there are some times where there's a specific play that I want to go over where I need to show what the play was in order for me to describe it. I'm going to be doing some more of that where I begin to break down individual plays and why I think that it was the right call or the wrong call, what I think went wrong. But I think that in this case, what we see is we see, obviously it's not obviously it doesn't, I haven't made it seem like it was that historically bad yet. Because of course, while, it is the first time it happened in NFL history, it's also very cherry-picked. Again, look at the 2020 Pittsburgh Steelers. They started off 11-0. They were undefeated into Week 13. And they still could not make it past the wild card round, but they won the division that year. So, obviously, every single team at some point or another is going to get into a really bad collapse that kills their postseason hopes. It's going to happen to every single team. This year, it wasn't just the Eagles it happened to. Look at the Jaguars. Look at the Minnesota Vikings, who finished off their year 1-6, and whose only win was a 3-0 win over the Las Vegas Raiders in Week 14. Look at the Atlanta Falcons, 6-6. But first place in the NFC South, only to go 1-4 in their final games and miss out on that title. You can look at the Seattle Seahawks, I guess. They were 5-2, had first place in the NFC West, failed to even make the playoffs. They finished 9-8, but again, now it really only was a 4-6 end, so it's not quite the same. I mean, at that notion, you can even look at the Dolphins, how they held a 1 seed, went 2-3 in their final games, and were demoted to the 6th seed. But it wasn't the same. Another example of a collapse, 2022, the Titans were 7-3, and they failed to make the playoffs. The Jets were 7-4, they failed to make the playoffs. Both finished 7-10 and failed to win, and failed to get their 8th win of the season in that time frame. Titans collapse was worse because it involved one more loss. It also involved them, leading the division that they wound up blowing. The Jets never had control of the AFC East. They got close, but they never had control of it. And really, for the Jets, it would have taken a lot more for them to have gone into the playoffs. The Jets, when they fell to 7-9, they were already eliminated from playoff contention. Titans still had a chance. They even controlled their own destiny to beat the Jaguars. So the Titans, they lost 6 in a row and they could still make the playoffs. Jets at their 5th loss, they couldn't. They would have had to have won out, finished at 9-8, and then rely on the Patriots losing a game. It'll be tough. Like, for the Jets, it genuinely was tough. But, we definitely saw that happen, last year. We can even look at, other cases. 2021, the Baltimore Ravens had that heartbreaking collapse that cost them a postseason berth. 2012, it happened to the Giants. Although they finished off the year 3-5 after a 6-2 start, but it's still kind of a collapse. If you understand the gist of what this video is, they had control of it and they lost it. It's just what you got to think about with these collapses. They happen every single year to every single team. But there's something about the Philadelphia Eagles collapse that makes you think that's not going to happen again. The Eagles have had heartbreaking collapses before. They had a 9-3 start in 2014 and they finished 10-6, which was not enough to make the playoffs in 2014, and they wound up missing out on that postseason berth. This is actually in a really bad era for Philadelphia. After they made the playoffs in 2010, they made the playoffs again in 2013, and then could not make the playoffs until 2017. In both 2010 and 2013, the Philadelphia Eagles did not win a playoff game despite winning the NFC East. In 2010, they lost to the Green Bay Packers, who wound up winning a Super Bowl that year. And in 2013, playoff loss to the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, 2017, that was the year that they did finally go out there, get the 1 seed, and they did actually win a Super Bowl. But the Eagles are struggling. I think the 2008 AFC Championship game was the last time they made it past the playoff round, past the first round, until 2017. It was a bit of a rough era in Philadelphia. So getting that playoff berth in 2014 would have been very helpful, and they ultimately failed to have gotten that. Now we're actually in a pretty good era in the Philadelphia Eagles, historically speaking, which has involved the playoff berth in 6 of the last 7 years, with 2 of the times the Eagles going to the Super Bowl. They won 1 of them, and they made it past the first round 3 times, because don't forget their win in a double doink game against the Chicago Bears in 2018. So, don't forget that. But there's just a lot of stuff for the Eagles that you have to break down. What makes a collapse like this so hard is the fact that you have to look at it. How did the team get to 10-1, and how do they only finish 1-5? Because there's layers to this. There's layers as to how high my happiness went, but how terrified I was the whole thing was going to collapse down, and how every single week I became a little bit more stressed, with the exception of the 1 week that the Eagles actually won a game, which even that wasn't comforting. So you have to look, and first of all, what you have to see is even though I don't want to call it a fake 10-1, it kind of was. The Eagles got super, super close, and a lot of times they were able to snatch victory out of the claws of nearly certain defeat. For example, in week 1, they decided to go for it on 4th and 2 at the New England 44-yard line, and they failed to pick up the first down. New England marched all the way down to the Philadelphia 19-yard line and faced 4th and 11. Maybe it was the Philadelphia 20. This catch was seemingly caught, but the Eagles were able to challenge it and get it overturned and ruled an incomplete pass. Had that pass been complete, let's say the Eagles ran out of timeouts and were unable to challenge it, the Eagles were only at a 25-20 lead over the New England Patriots. That's not a very big lead at all. If the Patriots had gotten a touchdown, they could have won the game. And with how little time was left, yeah, the Patriots would have won that game. Against the Vikings, the Eagles win 34-28. First of all, the Eagles had a very messy end to the game, and the Vikings were able to attempt a Hail Mary at the end. So that was completed, and yeah, Vikings win the game as long as the extra point is made. That's why Sirianni's decision to kick the extra point when the Eagles went up 33-21 was dumb, because he should have went for 2 in that spot. Also, there was that time where the Vikings fumbled it into the end zone out of bounds. And at first, it was ruled to have just been a fumble at the 1/2 yard line when it went out of bounds before the Eagles challenged it and they got it ruled as a touchback, which gave Philadelphia the ball at their 20-yard line. I then saw the next sequence. They were able to make some really good passes, marched down to the Minnesota 43-yard line, and Jake Elliott kicked a 61-yard field goal to give the Eagles a 13-7 lead into halftime when everyone thought it was going to be 13-10 Vikings. Because if the Vikings kicked it off deep, like the Eagles probably would not have had enough time, and they probably would have had to have attempted a Hail Mary. In all honesty, Eagles are likely to lose that game if not for that touchback. Week 3, 25-11 is actually a good game against the Buccaneers. Where it's a game where the Eagles begin to look at their 2022 selves and not all disheveled. Because you look at it, their 2023 win over the Vikings was not nearly as clean as the 2022 win over the Vikings in Week 2 in primetime. You then look at Week 4. The Eagles win 34-31 in overtime against the Commanders. And to be fair, the Commanders came into that game at 2-1. But had the Commanders beaten the Eagles would have been 3rd place in the NFC East at 3-1. It would have, I don't know if it would have been Cowboys and then Commanders or Commanders and then Cowboys. And honestly, Ron Rivera, there were 2 times where he went for the extra point when people were saying he should have gone for 2. And now in the game against the Seahawks, it's sort of understandable because the Seahawks still had 55 seconds and 2 timeouts left, and they wound up kicking the game-winning field goal. And honestly, they might have been more aggressive if they went for 2. But as time expired, I mean, I get that going for a 2-point conversion is a 50-50 chance, and doing it in OT is a 50-50 chance. But most coaches would have at least went for 2, because what if there's an injury in overtime? Now, I'm not saying the Commanders would have gotten ahead if they went for 2, and it would have been a win-lose decision. But they could have gotten that and beaten the Eagles 32-31. That's what made it so stressful. The Eagles were able to force a turnover on the Commanders in overtime and then have Jake Elliott kick a 54-yard field goal to get the win. But, I mean, like, good God. Week 5, against the Rams. They're, 23-14. Again, a game where the Eagles are seemingly playing well, but they could have played better. I saw part of that game on the main event. Week 6, they somehow lost to a Zach Wilson-led Jets team, 20-14, as the Jets defense forced 4 turnovers on the Philadelphia defense. And while the Philadelphia defense played good, they couldn't force any turnovers on the Jets. They just kept forcing them to punt the ball away or kick a field goal. And Eagles offense absolutely imploded. The Jets honestly had a more competent offense than the Eagles in that game. Of course, Nick Sirianni's pretty dumb pass attempt on 3rd and 9 definitely did not help the Philadelphia Eagles, but Eagles could have very well have lost that game just because of how much they imploded after they blew a 14-3 lead early in the second quarter. Week 7 against Dolphins, a much-needed bounce-back win were again 31-17, and it seems the Eagles are finally starting to look like their old selves. And then in Week 8, they won 38-31 over the Commanders, where the Commanders blew a 10-point lead. Again, not the most comforting as a Philadelphia Eagles fan. Because again, it's like the Commanders suddenly just completely came apart. And to be fair, the 2022 Eagles had struggles against the Commanders as well. They lost to the Commanders that year. So it's like, at least we aren't losing to the Commanders, but it's tough. Week 9 against the Jets. Against the Cowboys. 28-23. On a 2-point conversion attempt to make it 20-25, Dak Prescott accidentally stepped out of bounds. Otherwise, instead of having to go for it in that spot, they could have just kicked the field goal. The Dallas offense was able to drive all the way to the Philadelphia 6-yard line after the Eagles had to punt and then gave 25 free yards to the Cowboys in penalties. But the Cowboys were unable to get it done in that spot despite having first and goal. They were simply unable to get the touchdown. And there were times where the Cowboys faced 4th and 1 at the 1-yard line and were still unable to get the thing in. The Eagles won that game by millimeters. Week 10, they have a break. Week 11, a pretty good game for the Eagles. They fall down 17-7, but they are able to come back and win 21-17 against the Chiefs by shutting them out in the second half. And again, I get that it's a close game, another bounce-back game, but it was against one of the best teams in the league, so I'll give them a pass for that. But Week 12 against a struggling Bills team, the Eagles trailed by 10 heading into the third quarter. It was 24-14. James Bradbury actually looked competent for one game, but it was stressful. Jake Elliott had to make a 59-yard field goal just to send the game into OT, and when they had it, the Eagles had to march on the field and score a touchdown because the Bills got a field goal in. And questionable decision-making by Sean McDermott and taking a knee with 20 seconds left instead of trying to get them into field goal range to win the game in regulation. I get that you're scared of an interception because if it gets picked off, the Eagles can win in regulation. But a lot of teams would still be trying for that spot at least a little bit. Obviously, if Elliott misses the kick, then which only had a 22% chance of being made, then obviously, Bills win because they're getting the ball at their own 49-yard line, and they can just kneel out the clock from there. There's nothing Philadelphia can do to stop that. Good God. Obviously, Week 13, I was so confident when our defense pretty much forced the 49ers to... They didn't even show up in the first quarter. We had a 6-0 lead, only for the Eagles to then blow it and lose 42-19 against the San Francisco 49ers. When the Eagles were down 14-6 at half, I realized that there was still a chance that we could come back. But instead, we completely caved in the second half, and the Niners outscored us in the second half 28-13. After the Eagles were already trailing. It was just bad. Week 14, the Cowboys were better than us on their special teams, on their offense, their defense. The Eagles lost 33-13, and the only reason why it wasn't 33-6 was because the Eagles got a scoop and score. But that's why. Brandon Aubrey made 2 59-yard field goals, and that's just really telling because at that point, you have to kick the ball at a lower angle, and the Eagles just could not do anything to stop the ball from going in. I get that the Cowboys are good at home, but they struggle against good teams, and we had John Hussey as the referee. At that point, I began to worry. The Eagles no longer had the 1 seed, and again, it would take a miracle for the Eagles to win out at this point, and I was really scared about the Seahawks game, but when the Eagles were up 10-3 at the half, I was like, this is fine. Now, the Seahawks game, I will say, was marred by the referees. But you do have to realize how people are going to say that the Dolphins game was marred by the refs, how the Dolphins got 10 penalties and the Eagles got 0. To a lot of people, that is suspicious. You have to think about the Bills game, how they never called a holding penalty against the Philadelphia Eagles. Got to think about that. So the refs at points of the season were actually making calls to help Philadelphia. So I guess people said now it's only right that the refs made calls to hurt Philadelphia. A false start on Jason Kelce, who has never been called out for that kind of a false start. Well, he was called out for that kind of a false start. And the Eagles lose to the Seahawks 20-17, mainly because the Seattle Seahawks were able to drive down the field with less than 2 minutes left, and then they were able to pick off Jalen Hurts when he was trying to throw it down the field to get Philadelphia into field goal range. Would I have made that deep of a throw? Probably not. I probably would have gotten us a more careful throw that got the Eagles into the fringe of field goal range, and then have it come down to a 60-yard attempt by Jake Elliott. Because Jake Elliott, in all likelihood, has a good chance of making that kick. He's not going to make it from Philadelphia's own 45-yard line. That would just be craziness. That would be like a 72-yard field goal attempt that there's no chance of it being made. But like I wouldn't have gone for that risky of a throw to the Seattle 17-yard line. And honestly, was that even intercepted? Like, I don't know if that was an actual interception. I watched it, not sure. They do tend to be more lenient on interceptions in terms of like having control of the ball before you fall down. I mean, like, he got both feet in bounds, but I don't know. But I don't know. But in any case, I mean, that Kelce false start, and there was another interception by Julian Love. They didn't call defensive pass interference that got them the interception. So again, the refs actually hurt the Eagles in that game, and the Eagles really should have won. And if they had won, instead of falling to 10-4, they would have been 11-3, and actually had momentum on their side. Because when the next game was a 33-25 win over the Giants, at first it sounds good. But you got to consider how close the game actually was in reality. The Eagles built up a 20-3 lead, and the game nailed to 20-18 because the Eagles just didn't show up to the third quarter. They muffed a punt that gave the Giants short field to get a touchdown, and then Adoree Jackson had a 76-yard pick six, and a penalty on the Eagles let the Giants have an easy 2-point conversion attempt. From there, it was rough because the Eagles absolutely had to score. They were within field goal range, and they did, thank God. Thank God the Eagles actually scored. And they scored again. Giants score on a 69-yard pass. Eagles had set up a field goal. The Giants have 70 seconds, and they almost get it done. Tyrod Taylor manages to march down to the Philadelphia 26-yard line, but thankfully the pass is intercepted in the end zone. Another game where people say that the refs screwed over the Giants. I like to say the refs screwed over the Eagles in that game, but I guess you can call it a wash because they made questionable calls on both sides. Obviously, Week 17 against the Cardinals is where I really began to worry because I figured that a blowout win over the Cardinals and at least the Eagles could have momentum, win Week 18, win the NFC East. Cowboys lost to the Dolphins, so that was helpful. Unfortunately, even though the Eagles built up to a 21-6 lead, they could not force the Cardinals to punt once. In a 4th-and-4 situation at the goal line, Kyler Murray does complete the pass. Because, I mean, wow, they kicked the field goal there. It's 28-24 versus 20-21 doesn't make a big difference. They obviously want to get to 28-28 after they had already tied up the game in the third quarter at 21. Then you have Jonathan Gannon's onside kick, which a lot of people thought was stupid. But official Jack did not make a dumb decision on it. He didn't make an offensive video for it because he wouldn't have done that himself. He would have likely kicked it off deep. But there are reasons to believe why Jonathan Gannon would have wanted to have done an onside kick there. The goal was, even if the Eagles scored, Gannon knew that the offense was moving the ball pretty much at will on every single one of their real drives, except for the one at the end of the first half. The Arizona Cardinals managed to find the red zone. On two of them, they settled for a field goal. In one of them, they got a pick six by the Eagles. But they had at least been driving the ball efficiently, and he never had to punt the ball. So Gannon knew that if they gave them a short field, the Eagles could not kill time on the clock as effectively, and they would get the ball back. If they were able to do a faster drive, and obviously the Eagles being held to a field goal was really catastrophic. It was a spot where the Eagles could not have afforded to have settled for a field goal, but it was 4th and 19. They really had no choice but to go for a field goal. But that's a time where, again, you really did not want to go for a field goal there. You really needed a touchdown so that the Cardinals, at the very least, would only be able to tie it up or have a game-deciding go-for-two decision. And of course, the Cardinals marched down the field. They made it 35-31. And while the Eagles drove to the Philadelphia 49-yard line, Hurts' Hail Mary pass was intercepted in the end zone. And that was game. They pretty much lost the same way they were able to beat the Giants. And they had lost to the Arizona Cardinals. Now, at this point, the Eagles are screwed. Because there's no way the Cowboys are losing to the Washington Commanders, who had lost 7 straight. They're in the 5 seed. And Sirianni picked up on this and rested 2 starters. 2 of them were injured. Somehow 4 people got injured during the game against the Giants. And of course, for A.J. Brown, our best wide receiver, and Sidney Brown, who wasn't a great safety, but was able to get a pick 6 against the Cardinals, as the Eagles' only defense for the past few weeks. I mean, having him lost in the playoffs were both major blows. Major blows. And the Eagles fall behind 24-0 because of these injuries, and they lose the game 27-10 against the Giants. Again, with over half of the Eagles banged up, you can't say this was truly a win for the Giants. Plus, the Giants are going to ultimately lose a better spot as the draft pick. So I'm just praying that the number 5 spot for the LA Chargers is good and the number 6 spot for the Giants is bad. Then again, not sure how much I want that, because that would actually be bad for be bad for me, because I don't want the Chargers to be successful. But I just need the Giants to be spited in some way for that. So I'm going to cheer for it to happen nonetheless. Again, it was just all bad. And obviously these woes continue into the playoffs. So my final thoughts on this: if you adjust these games for luck, yes, the Eagles could have very easily have lost against the Patriots. They could have very easily have lost against the Minnesota Vikings. They could have very easily have lost against the Dallas Cowboys. And at that point, they're 8-9. They could have very easily lost against the Bills. But at that point, you have to consider the Eagles could have very easily have beaten the Seattle Seahawks. You have to consider that point. They could have very easily have beaten the Jets. Though the Giants' Week 16 game, again, you could say that they arguably should have lost that game. It really goes on both sides of the ball. Honestly, Cardinals, if Gannon didn't attempt an onside kick that seemed so stupid but actually worked so well, then what happens if the Eagles were able to win the game because of that decision? What if that decision cost Jonathan Gannon the game? I mean, the possibilities are endless, but no matter how you slice it, the Eagles had a historic collapse, but one that's probably never going to happen again. It's, first of all, you don't always even get teams that start off 10-1, and I highly doubt that another team is going to blow it the same way Philadelphia did.